G'day, brothers and sisters. This is the other Paul for a very special episode live in person in my own home with none other than the Reverend River Devereux. River, how are you going this fine Australian morning after church?
Very well, thank you, Paul. Yeah, we just went to your church, St. John's Cathedral in Parramatta. Had a lovely time there with the Reverend David Auld. That's his church.
That's right. A lovely morning prayer service. Still unbelievably surreal that one of the YouTube boys is here in person with me, man. Let alone in my own home, which is flipping unbelievable for an awesome in-person interview. But even just to get that going, how are you finding Sydney so far?
I think Sydney's great. It's sort of just like a bigger version of Auckland, where I'm from. The sort of terrain, the landscape, the environment, the culture is all very much the same thing. But Sydney's just bigger. More facilities, bigger malls, that sort of thing.
Pretty much, yeah. Unbelievably multicultural as well.
Yeah, but Auckland's the same.
Yeah. And with that, people may notice the totally professional mic stand we have here of your set of books that we got from Coorong yesterday when we first met up. Tell us about these purchases.
Yeah, well, we went there probably 30 minutes after we met yesterday.
Yeah, straight up. We came in, I bear hugged and tried to pick you up.
That's right.
And we went straight over to Coorong.
So we went there, and then I wanted to get some books because in New Zealand we really don't have very good Christian bookshops at all. What did I get? I got Matthew Barrett. He edited this book called The Doctrine on Which the Church Stands or Falls, which is all about justification by faith alone. So there's a number of essays from different theologians about, for instance, justification in the Old Testament, historical context, etc. It's about 900 pages. It's like a massive tome on justification by faith. We've got Stephen Charnock's The Providence of God. Providence of God being something I'm particularly interested in at the moment and reading about and talking about. And then James Bannerman's The Church of Christ, which is this massive tome on ecclesiology. He's a Presbyterian, obviously we're Anglicans, but there's a lot of overlap with our ecclesiology. And I'm particularly interested in this book because he talks for quite a while about the relationship between the church and the secular state, which is something that I'm also very interested in right now. So we're really looking forward to getting into these books.
That's unbelievable. That's awesome. And one of the best decisions we made yesterday was just the spur of a moment from your suggestion. Let's go see Dune 2.
Yeah. So you did that last night?
100%.
Yeah. Man, I thought it was an awesome movie. What did you think?
It was flipping cool. And it definitely got some more primal urges within us ready from the whole Lisan al-Gaib moment.
Paul made a meme. It was like me most days. It's like this dude of
just the ordinary white guy just there,
and it's me after watching Dune 2. It's just like the Taliban.
That's pretty much. Oh my word! That's how I reacted to that.
Pretty much. Nah, it was awesome. I just thought it was fantastic. I love Dune 1. I thought Dune 1 was fantastic. Dune 2, it's not so much like an improvement in the sense that the filmmakers or the actors have suddenly become more talented or anything. Nah. It's better than Dune 1 simply because it being part 2 of the story, there's just more going on. The stakes are higher. The characters are deeper. They're not having to introduce things anymore. But it is better than Dune 1. If you love the first one, you'll love this. And there's actually a lot to talk about from a religious perspective about it.
There is.
It really gets into the religious themes of the book. So I guess we could talk about that for a little bit, eh?
I reckon we could, eh? And we've got to be very conscious in not spoiling it for people who may be still wanting to see it. So we'll go around that. But to keep it vague, but still relevant stuff in the movie, there is that fascinating mix where normally you'll have movies, especially today, where they'll portray like the religious fundamentalists, and whether they're Christians or some other religion or like a Christian analogy, and they're just these silly fundamentalists, and you have the enlightened atheist realistic people who they're actually right about everything. But this movie completely subverts that, because you do have the classic groups of the very religious ones who believe in the Lisan al-Gaib or the Mahdi, which is directly taken from Islamic eschatology.
So this is that. I don't think this is a spoiler because this is in the first chapter.
Yeah.
Paul Atreides is basically the space messiah. And so, there's the fundamentalists who are completely convinced that he is the space Messiah who will lead them into the sort of promised land, so to speak. And then there's the skeptics. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's those classic parties there. But how the movie subverts that is that it doesn't take and I guess it's a book thing as well, it doesn't take the atheist perspective, like, oh, no, it's all fake. It's just all material. It's just all particles and chemicals firing everywhere. There's actually reality to it. Not whether it's a complete reality, it can be debated, but there's actual like supernatural and prophetic and miraculous stuff that actually happens from the hand of Paul Atreides and others in the religious movement. And time again, they kind of prove the skeptics false.
That's right.
But there's still, at the same time, for the other side, there's still the element of, and this isn't a spoiler because it's a thing from the first movie anyway, but like the whole Bene Gesserit.
Yeah, so that leads to some really interesting questions about free will and divine providence. So basically, there's this religious sect called the Bene Gesserit, who are the books eventually reveal are actually the forefathers, not forefathers, the
descendants.
Descendants, that's the word, of the Jesuits, which is kind of...
I still haven't looked it up. I still cannot believe you because it sounds too good to be true.
No, it is true, though. And they, for centuries, have been infiltrating the Fremen, that's the native populace of Arrakis, and creating this sort of mythology that there's going to be this Messiah who's going to liberate them and that kind of thing. And I've been creating these sort of myths of what this Messiah will be like, the clues to look for. And I think the central question in the movie, from my perspective, is Paul Atreides actually the space Messiah in the sense of that, like, this is actually real? Like, there is divine providence, there is fate, there is destiny. Or is this just a self-fulfilling prophecy where the Bene Gesserits have sort of created this system that can't fail, where eventually there's going to be someone who ticks these boxes? But I really think watching the movie, it does seem to be saying that there is providence, that this is real, because there's lots of supernatural stuff. Again, not a spoiler, because there's supernatural things in the first film. Like in the first film, Paul Atreides has visions of Chani, who's played by Zendaya, before he even sets foot on Arrakis. So, I mean, how can you make that up? How can they have implanted that into him? It seems to be that this is actually a real thing that's going on.
And he was, as per the first movie, he was an aberration. He wasn't what the Bene Gesserit were planning as well. Yeah. So it's not like they implanted memories anyway. It's not like that.
So it has some really interesting questions. I guess if to sort of apply it to Christianity, it would be like how there's a lot of people who think, like atheists, who think that Jesus having fulfilled all of these Old Testament prophecies in such a perfect way proves that maybe Jesus never existed in the first place, that someone looked at all the prophecies and then created this fictional character who fulfills them all. But then there's us who obviously believe that it's all real. That's sort of like the tension of the film. Is this just a man-made thing, or is this actually legit?
Exactly. Yeah, and it beautifully subverts that trend of just dunking and crapping all over religion and Christianity, because it actually does the opposite. It craps on the skeptics, because even though you do see, again, no spoilers, like the if you will, the political machinations to convert the Fremen to all believe in Paul Atreides, even though there's clearly like political aims and interests, whatever, involved in that, there's still the supernatural stuff that in the end gets that brings people along with it. That convinces people. That really is the brilliance of all that.
And then I think another question it raises is sort of free will. So I'd love to talk about this actually. If there is providence, if God is sovereign over history and sort of makes things happen the way he wants them to happen, how much free will can we really have? Because if you have perfect libertarian free will, that must mean that you have the ability to go against what God wants and create your own destiny. If God is totally sovereign, then you actually don't have freedom over your own will. Now, with Paul Atreides, Paul he knows what the prophecies are about who he's to become. And he also has visions of what will happen as a consequence of him becoming the Messiah. And he's afraid of that. And so he doesn't want to be the Messiah. He doesn't want to follow this prophesied route because he's afraid of the consequences. But then, I mean, this is a slight spoiler. So if you don't want spoilers, I don't know, just
If you don't want spoilers, even a slight spoiler,
we'll have chapters on the YouTube thing.
Yeah, we'll do that. Stop now, and I'll also give the hand signal like that for when the spoiler's over. So what basically Paul realizes that if he becomes the space messiah, hundreds of billions of people around the universe, just billions, I think,
he killed.
Yeah,
billions, maybe not hundreds of billions, but a lot of people.
A lot of bodies.
And so he's really afraid of that. And he doesn't want to go down this route, but he does end up going down this route. And one thing the film shows, and I imagine it's in the book too, is that there is a paradigm shift that takes place almost against his will. You know, I don't want to spoil it too much, but something happens where he then goes full Messiah mode. Yeah. And it seems to be that is against his will, so to speak. He doesn't want this, but through providence, presumably, it ends up happening. The thing he didn't want to have happen does happen. It's fated, it's destined. And so that's a big tension in all of philosophy. Every religion that has sort of raised these questions, every philosophical system that's considered this has realized that if you have perfect free will, then God doesn't have any control over history. If he has total control over history, you don't have any free will. And so some people want to meet in the middle and say, you know, God has sovereignty and you have free will. I don't know if that actually makes any sense.
Yeah. I think the movie tries to do that a little bit too, because on the one hand, you have the very clear things. He sees visions and that stuff that actually ends up happening. Even when he tries to resist it, like the whole circumstances of the whole planetary geopolitics forces him to go that route. Is the spoiler over?
No.
Okay, so it's not over. So that all that happens, but then at the same time, you have in the first movie, he has the vision of that one guy. I forgot his name.
The guy he ends up killing, right?
Yeah. He has the vision of that one guy, and it's like he grows up with him, and he becomes mentored by him and all that. But he ends up killing him a few minutes later in a fight. So that's an example of a prophecy, quote unquote, or a vision that doesn't go that way.
But then the movie suggests actually in this film that the reason he has visions of this guy is because he killed him. Like by killing him, their souls are now intertwined and he can speak to him from beyond the grave. Because in the movie, he actually says, again, I can't remember his name. He's like, so-and-so, speak to me, tell me what to do. And he does, remember? He has that vision of him and he tells him, you need to go to the place, you need to see, you need to get on high.
Yeah, okay, no, that's a good point. I didn't think of that. So I guess it really isn't intact. There is the intact tension of providence and and it shows how ironically it actually demonstrates the beautiful classical reformed concept of God. Providence isn't just the puppet master directly moving stuff around directly like occasionalists used to argue, but that it happens by means. And in this case, again, the spoilers are still happening, so if you're still watching, I don't think we'll go crazy with the spoilers, but in any event, it's not like when Paul is trying to resist and say, no, I don't want to go south and be this big bad leader guy. It's not like God just comes down like, well, nope, and just puts him there. It's the material circumstances of the world and the geopolitics and the war compel him to go that way, and that's how it's fulfilled. It's fulfilled through the free will, quote unquote, of other creatures and other circumstances, and it pushes him that way, as it was prophesied, basically.
Yeah. All right, should we end the spoilers then?
Spoilers over. They're all over. Okay, you're all good now.
But then, in terms of the quality of the movie, I mean, the acting is amazing. And obviously the cinematography, the soundtrack, the production design, the special effects. People have been particularly talking about the special effects are amazing. It's not like, Marvel movies where you can just tell it's CGI just by looking at it.
I mean, like, obviously it's CGI. And
a lot of them are models. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that. You know the special effects and all that, and there's models and there's VFX, whatever. But it's just like you don't think of that. You just think, whoa, that thing exploded.
It has a real sense of physical reality.
Exactly.
it feels heavy. The helicopter sort of machines.
Yeah, the ornithopters. I think that's what they call it.
They feel real. They feel like they've got real weight to them. It's fantastic. Definitely would recommend you watch it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess there's not much more to say.
Completely recommend that. And the beauty of that, that issue with Providence and free will. I don't know. Is there much other directions? I guess taking away from the movie, I guess that does compel us to discuss Providence and free will more generally in our actual lives. Ironically, that's kind of us, the Gospel Coalition. They'll say like how strange are things, or how Barbie preaches us the gospel. But in this case, we actually have a genuinely cool one. We're not just trying to contrive something out of thin air from a thing just to say, oh look, it's the gospel, guys. But no, it's in actual deep theme in, as far as I've heard, the books and the movie really convey that really well. So it's a meaningful discussion. What is what the movie says about providence and free will, and how does that get us to reflect on it in our real universe? So what do you think?
I guess what made me think about was just how, if there's total sovereignty on God's part, total providence, we can't have free will, because
in a libertarian sense.
Yeah. So let's. What does free will mean? The way that I'm saying it, so people now call it libertarian free will. I usually just stick with free will because that's how the reformers used that phrase. They meant libertarian free will, but also it's more. I actually think it's a bit easier to wrap your head around it. Free will means, do you have freedom over your will? And the answer basically is no, not in the sense that you can completely steer your will in any direction you want it to go. For starters, that's sort of just demonstrably obviously not true, that we don't have control over our wills, because we want things that we don't want to want, if I had free will, then I would never commit another sin in my life, because I would perfectly be able to not will sin, but I can't stop myself from willing sin.
Exactly.
So that's that. But also just in terms of the fact that God turns your will in the way that he wants it to go to, so that his plans can work out. So if there was perfect free will, it would be possible for you to be crossing the road and you didn't look both ways and you get hit by a bus and you die, and the bus driver wasn't paying enough attention, so he didn't hit the brakes fast enough. And that's just an unfortunate mistake. And there's no greater meaning to it. There's no purpose to it. It's just, you have the freedom to cross the road and you have the freedom to look both ways, and here's the freedom to pay attention. And there you go. Oops. But if there's providence, it's actually that, no, God wanted that to happen. Now, we could talk about his two different wills. He has two wills. He has a revealed will and a hidden will. In his revealed will, he doesn't want it to happen. In his hidden will, he does. That's very complicated. But basically, he actually orchestrated the situation where you didn't look both ways, where the bus driver wasn't paying attention, so that you'd get hit by that bus. And that's really frightening for a lot of people. I find the alternative more frightening. That I could just be killed and there's no meaning. It's an absurdity. There's nothing behind it. And so people might say, oh, God has a big plan for your life. That actually just isn't true if there's free will, because he might have a plan for your life, but you could just fall down the stairs and die, and there goes his plan. Is God in control, or is he not? And if he's not in control, how can we have any trust that our salvation is going to work out, that the kingdom of heaven is really going to come, that Satan's really going to be defeated, so on and so forth? And you can't have both. You can't have total sovereignty and free will. Something has to give. One person has to give way more to the other. I'd rather we give way to God, because he's obviously more powerful than us. Precisely. What do you think?
And and I completely agree with that, precisely because, as you said, like, whether it be logically or experientially, we just know it's not the case, that our will isn't free. We are, just for one, we are massively formed by our environment. And we still have something of an individual will, such that we can still analyze that, compartmentalize it, and choose to go that way or not. But in the end, that's still something fundamental what we do. We don't do that with everything with all of our premises upon which we operate, with all of our behaviors and all that stuff. We do it maybe one thing at a time, but in the end, that's still how we operate. And then likewise, even just more fundamentally, just how our will is with respect to us as humans, and particularly as fallen humans, as you were talking about, that if we had a completely free will, and if we freely willed, as we do as Christians, to not sin, we just never sin anymore. It really would be that simple. But we just know for a fact is spiritual, physical, psychological, and more, that we just don't. It is a will, and we do have a range of options, but these are limited range, if you will, in terms of how we choose things. And with respect to salvation, it's a one-way thing. Either you are sanctified to choose God, or you're not. And of course, you can have the additional questions if there's like our Augustinian and Lutheran friends and what have you talking about whether there's a distinction between sanctifying grace and the grace of election and all that. You can talk about all that stuff, but point being, that kind of grace of choosing things is it's exactly that. It's a grace. It's not something that we have in our fallen nature.
Yeah. So like as a Christian, I could say I know that I don't have free will because of the fact that one day I don't want to do something, and then the next day, for some reason, I find myself wanting to do it, and I want to do it so much I can't resist my own desires. But then on the flip side, I know there's no free will because when I wasn't a Christian, there's no way I'd ever want God. Exactly. And the fact that my will turned towards God has to have been out of my control. And what Luther says in The Bondage of the Will, and what the Protestant reformers would end up saying, is that the will is the faculty of us, the faculty of man. There's actually sort of the most authoritative over you, is the most power over you. So in Roman Catholicism, the intellect, as far as I understand it, the intellect is basically above the will. It's sort of the most powerful faculty in your person.
Right.
So your intellect, which is as far as I understand, basically untainted from the fall. Your intellect is sort of isn't completely depraved, or it's sort of more intact. Your intellect can steer your will,
right?
Which still has its own sort of leaning towards sin, but your intellect can actually steer it back in the right direction. In Protestantism, the will is at the top, and so there's no faculty in you that's more powerful than the will. So your will ends up basically dictating your life, and you don't dictate your will. And obviously not, because even if you wanted to want something different, it's only because you wanted to.
Yeah.
So the buck stops with your will. And so that being the case, it's actually God who's sort of steering it. But, this leads to questions about why he permits evil.
Of course. Yeah.
That sort of thing. But I actually have some verses I wanted to mention in this discussion. So there's lots of verses in the scriptures that talk generally about God's sovereignty over all affairs of man. But there's these passages in the Bible where God, you can actually see God he's directly arranging bad things happening, evil things happening even. So 1 Chronicles chapter 18, verse 22, these prophets actually lie to the king about what's going to happen. And it actually says here, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of these your prophets, so that disaster would befall you. And in the King's version, we actually see God send an evil spirit to the prophets.
That one I was thinking of that exact dual accounts of the same event, where on one hand it says there's the Lord saying who will go out from us as a lying spirit. So it's not like him directly saying the lie to the thing. But it's another spirit that he sends to be the lying spirit.
He does it through,
Exactly. But then in the Chronicles passage, it's just more directly, it just telescopes the event and says the Lord made those prophets lie. Basically.
And then 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 11, God sends them a strong delusion so that they might believe what is false, so that they might be condemned.
Exactly.
That's really, really strong.
Yes.
Isaiah chapter 13, verse 17, he says, behold, I am stirring up the Medes against them, who will have no regard for silver. Their bows will slaughter young men. They will have no mercy on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes will not pity children. So God stirs up the Medes, who will end up raping and pillaging other cultures. This is a great one. 2 Samuel chapter 24, it says, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. And so he incited David against them, saying, go, number Israel and Judah. Right? So he incites David. God says to David, go and number Israel. Then after David numbers Israel, it says, David's heart struck him after he had numbered the people. And David said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I have done. So David is responsible for his sin, but it's actually God who incited David against him. What is going on there? We'll talk about it in just a moment, but I'll just do a few others. In 1 Samuel chapter 19, it says, a harmful spirit from the Lord came upon Saul, and it makes Saul try and murder David by throwing a spear at him. And then lastly, Revelation 17, verse 17, God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by agreeing to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be fulfilled. So God has put it into their hearts to worship the beast in Revelation. So what is going on there? You can't really get around this. It's making it very clear that God has directly arranged even evil and sinful things to happen. And also, yet, he's not responsible for the sin.
Yeah.
The people bear their own responsibility. And you might just think, this is impossible. This is logically, philosophically impossible. And I would say no to that. I would appeal to mystery. But also, God is not in the world like we are. He's outside of the world. So he's not like this bully who's pushing you around or a puppet master, because those analogies don't work, because they're in the same physical reality. He's outside of this reality, and that somehow, in some mysterious way, he can steer things in our reality without being culpable for it himself.
Exactly.
Douglas Wilson makes this great analogy. He says it's like when Hamlet says, to be or not to be. Did Hamlet say that, or did Shakespeare say that?
That's the exact analogy I use, but I use it with respect to I'll either just do like a generic story thing or like the Lord of the Rings.
Sure.
So I'll normally say, let's say there's a written story. I'll just write a story right here on this piece of paper right now. I think I did a video on this on my channel a while ago, actually, when I had the big fancy whiteboard. But I was just like, let's say you write a story right now, and it's this guy goes up to a fork in the road, and he rationally and freely deliberates which side he's going to go, and he decides to take the right path. Now, in the story, that was him making the choice. He was rationally deliberating that. But I wrote the story. I'm transcendent from that story that's on that piece of paper, and I made that happen. I could have said that he freely chose to go left.
Yeah.
And yet within the story, that is him making that decision. That beautifully demonstrates the paradox. Yeah. And it is just that, paradox. It's not a contradiction. I mean, it is a contradiction if you believe in a libertarian free will such that it's free from transcendent constraints. Then, obviously the analogy breaks, but that's just because libertarian free will in that sense is just stupid and incoherent.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
People might say this analogy that doesn't work because Hamlet isn't real; he's made up. But first of all, the analogy is biblical, because God actually likens us to clay in a potter's hand. So he actually does liken us to the art made by the artist. And then Romans 9, of course, it says, "Who are you, O clay, to say to the potter, why did you make me this way?"
And the second one is basically to quote Morpheus from The Matrix: "What is real? How do you define real?" Sure. And in that sense, it's like, well, real for us is like we're in this world, so obviously it's real for us. But given the absolute transcendence of God, how is his transcendence above us any less? How is his transcendence above us like not so far greater than our transcendence from a story written on a piece of paper?
That's right.
Or even actually, you can make the analogy much closer. Let's say you made a program with like a simulated world. We've got video games exactly like that. And the analogy is much closer in that respect, where you actually have worlds that are far less complicated than ours, but analogously the same in a respect, where you've got simulated things happening. There's cause and effect. There's rudimentary intelligences, if you will, and you can program them to such a point where they can make, at least in a very basic sense, decisions to do this or that. But the program has ultimate control over all of that, especially if you're looking at all the level of the base machine code or regular coding language, if you will. And so in that respect, the analogy holds beautifully, because it's irrelevant if from our perspective it's not real, because in a sense, even a written story in a piece of paper is real because it's a story that I'm at least imagining. Right? It's at least in my mind. And what are we if not just the figments of God's imagination?
Yeah, but you made another great point. You said, God, like, so someone might say the analogy of who said it, Hamlet or Shakespeare, doesn't work because Hamlet's made up, he's not real. And so people go to themselves, oh, I'm so much better than Hamlet. I'm so much greater than Hamlet. But actually, okay, but isn't God so much greater than Shakespeare?
Yeah, exactly.
So God, in his almighty power, can dictate what his creatures will do, and he can dictate that they will do those things freely.
Exactly.
Freely in this sense, as involuntarily. Like that they want to do it, and it's their own choice that they're responsible for. Yeah. So and this is just so important to affirm in Christianity.
Yeah.
And a great example is because a lot of people get offended by this stuff, but there's an example that every Christian has to agree with. If you don't agree with this, then you're basically just a heretic.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Was it God's will that his own son be falsely accused and judicially murdered by the Jews and the Romans?
Yeah.
Obviously not. It's its own beloved son. And obviously those who are responsible for putting him to death would be punished for it eternally. Okay, so it's not his will that his son be murdered. But then on the other hand, it obviously is.
Yeah.
Because he's obviously predestined.
It's in Acts chapter, what is it, 5 is it?
Chapter 4.
Or 4, yeah, where Peter says that.
What your hand and your will predestined to take place.
Yeah.
But Peter also rebukes the people for falsely accusing him.
Exactly. Yeah.
So every Christian has to agree that there have been at least some occasions where someone has done something under God's providential guidance that they alone bear responsibility for. And so we just extend that to all things.
Yep.
That God has control of everything. Because I think what happens with people when people want to concede, okay, fine, it happened with Christ, but not with me, is end up sort of saying that some people are more important to God than others. Like, okay, God will providentially guide this person, but he won't providentially guide me.
Yeah.
He's indifferent about what happens to me. If I get hit by a bus and get killed today, or if I live another day and become a great, person or whatever with lots of influence, he's sort of indifferent to it, and he's just left it up to our free will. Yeah. But for someone else, he's tinkering with everything and making sure. Yeah, and that's actually kind of horrifying in a way.
It's not only horrifying, but it just makes absolutely no sense with like when you think of the logistics of that. Because I think this is one point that Dr. James White, this is actually an extremely good point on this issue he makes when he addresses that exact argument. And whatever you think of Dr. White, he on his other opinions on other things, obviously we're Anglicans, we're Credo Baptists, we believe in the sacraments.
Credo Baptists.
Yeah, sorry. Baptist infiltration in my head. No, we're Credo Baptists. I hope that's not clipped. We're Credo Baptists. We believe in a higher view of the sacraments, of course. But he makes an extremely good point on this issue where he speaks of, okay, so there's people who will say, oh, well, Jesus was predestined, and that was an exception. Or maybe the apostles were predestined. And, oh, well, that one time when David says in my absolute favorite Psalm 129, you know us for my risings and my sittings down, blah, blah, blah. Not blah, 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 but yeah, basically that. Oh, okay, so they're the exceptions. So A, it's completely arbitrary, but B, how does God tinker with their lives with such precision that he knows exactly when David's going to stand up and to sit down, when he's going to go to this battle, that battle, who's going to kill, and when David's ultimately going to die, and how, and multiply that with Jesus and the apostles, how does he do that without interfering in the will of the lives of others? That makes absolutely no sense. For Christ to be born as who he is or was, and to the parents he was, in the place and time he was, in the fulfillment of Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy, how many generations of ancestors and whole societies around them that influenced them would God have had to interact with in order to make sure that happened?
And let's think about David's life. So you've got... we won't cover everything, but okay, his relationship with Saul. Well, the Bible tells us that God sent a harmful spirit into Saul. In another place, God sent an evil spirit into Saul to make him hate David. So this whole drama between Saul and David, God has incited Saul against him. David becomes king, and then God tells him that he will have a son who will be God's own son, who will reign on the throne of David for all time.
Exactly.
That's, of course, our Lord Jesus Christ. Now, who did he... Jesus' lineage, who does it go through? It goes through Bathsheba, who David committed adultery with. So even David's adultery with Bathsheba is falling under God's providential plan. And then there's what we just read where God incited David against the Israelites. So God is obviously taking...
Exactly. And to make that even more extremely complicated, so God providentially arranged the adultery with Bathsheba for the line to continue. And what would God have had to ordain for that to happen? He had to ordain that there would be a battle involving Israelites and Palestinians and the Philistines. It's etymologically the same name, but whatever. Providentially, at the right time, there would have had to have been a battle with Philistines and Israelites in the front line where X number of men and that died in that battle or were injured or whatever, affecting their lives and their futures permanently. And so that battle was happening at the right time, such that David was able to command Uriah to go there and die. And so God thus providentially arranged also Uriah's death as well, what he would do.
That's right.
Just to get one moment of adultery to pass. Just for that one thing.
Now people will go, okay, well, fine. Yeah, we believe that God arranged that whole thing, but I don't think he arranges my life. Now, for starters...
What reasons? Why?
Yeah, now this is really problematic because on the one hand, that means that God thinks David's more important than you or whatever, which has its own issues because God, since God is simple, there's no sort of sense in which he sort of loves some people more than others or whatever. But also it would almost make it if their argumentation is correct, it would actually mean that he loves you more than David because he's given you the privilege of free will.
Yeah, exactly.
But
and yet David was after God's own heart.
Yeah. But the other thing is people often argue for libertarian free will by saying it's the only way that life can be fair, right? That things can be fair, that the problem of evil is resolved by libertarian free will. But the fact that there have been countless occasions through history where God has directly intervened means that the whole argument falls apart. Because now that's even more unfair. So for many people, God lets them do what they want, but then for some people, he just directly intervenes. How is that fair? And so I think it's best just to say God is sovereign. I mean, the scriptures say unequivocally that he is in control of all things. Proverbs 16 is a great chapter for that. All things arranged by God, even the wicked for the day of destruction, double predestination. And that actually gives us lots of comfort. It means that's why we can turn to God in times of pain and grief, because he's in control of history. If, you've got a loved one in hospital or whatever. I mean, I've had this myself. My son was in hospital and it looked like he was not going to make it. And it was one of the worst times of my life. It was because I believed that God was in sovereign control over everything that I could turn to him. But if there's libertarian free will and it's just like, he just got a rough deal, what's God going to do? Is God just going to say, they're there? And this is what leads you to open theism, where God suffers. Because if God is out of control and he's watching his people die of diseases that he has no control over, he's going to suffer too. Is the only way that you can make it seem like he's involved in any way is if God is basically like, yeah, I'm really sad about that too. And like that's and so you just make God weaker. You make him inept, and you bring him into our reality.
Exactly.
You make him beholden to our reality, but in fact, he's sovereignly in control over the whole thing.
Exactly.
And so,
And as a final observation, I think, for this great point, as you were talking about with how devotionally the providence of God is actually, it's not actually a scary thing. It's actually a much more comforting thing than the providence of like true chaos, which is frankly what free will, libertarian sense, actually is. And so there's an amazing quote I have that I love from the Confederate General, Jackson, aka Stonewall Jackson. And he's famous because he was, a Stonewall. He would stand in the vanguard on his horse, bullets would whiz by him and he just wouldn't flinch. And the reason for that is this in this amazing quote from him, apparently quoted, at least according to a wiki quote, from a work about him, Stonewall Jackson as a military commander, and apparently it quotes a real quote from him. If somehow this is a misattribution, whatever, no one kill me. But as far as I know, it's a real quote. But it's either way, it's a beautiful one. And he's speaking to another captain, where he says, quote, "Captain, my religious belief teaches me to feel as safe in battle as in bed. God has fixed the time for my death. I do not concern myself about that, but to be always ready, no matter when it may overtake me. Captain, that is the way all men should live, and then all would be equally brave." And so reading about that from him, reading some other things from him, and as well as even just watching the movie that was mostly about him, I think it's Gods and Generals, really, really good military movie. And just seeing how he acts exactly that, just as a consistent Calvinist, basically, he just doesn't flinch in battle because he knows whatever happens is going to happen. My will can't change it, so I'm just not going to worry about it. I'm just going to let it happen. And sure enough, it happens kind of like that. He's actually killed, as far as I'm aware, in a friendly fire incident. But he's just okay with it because he knows that whenever it happens, God's appointed that. And that's what made him just completely comfortable, even in battle. That's what's incredible about that.
Yeah, I think there's just two final points I want to make on this theme of providence. On the one hand, so one point I want to make is that, so God does steer people's wills. He does arrange everything that comes to pass, including bad things.
Yep.
So, on the one hand, he doesn't will there to ever be murder, but on the other hand, he does will to be murder. He arranges those things happening. But he didn't create evil. He's not the author of evil. Because evilness isn't a created thing. Exactly. It doesn't have its own created existence.
Yep.
Evil is only the lack of good or the deprivation of good, just like how darkness doesn't actually exist physically. It's just the absence of light. Or how cold doesn't physically exist. It's just the absence of heat. Now, if you think about any evil act that's ever taken place, it doesn't actually have its own unique physical existence. So, for instance, think about murder. In murder, there's nothing physically being created specific to murder. All you're doing is sort of tearing physical reality apart. Or another, horrible one, it would be RAPE. I'm not going to say it because that YouTube flags those words. That doesn't have its own unique physical existence. It's just taking sex, which is a created thing that's good, and then just turning it into an evil. There's no evil act that has its own existence. So all evil is just taking the good creation and sort of turning it in a bad way. So God isn't the author of sin, but he does still steer people's wills towards things like murder.
Exactly.
In a way that they hold the responsibility for it, and he doesn't, which is mysterious to us. But we've already looked at how that can happen with an author writing a character to do something.
Precisely.
And the other point is just that it's because of God's providence that salvation is by grace alone. Of course, this is, as Calvinists, this is obviously something we've always affirmed. We can't be saved by grace alone if God isn't in providential control of our salvation, period. That's just the fact of the matter. And if you read, obviously, Romans 9 is the key chapter. God hardens whom he wills. He has mercy on whom he wills. And then and then Romans 9, Paul says, therefore, it depends not on man's will or exertion, but on God who has mercy. And then, of course, the other big one for Calvinists would be Ephesians chapters 1 and 2. God predestined us before the foundation of the world. By grace you've been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. So it's God alone who drew us to himself. Again, in Ephesians 2, Paul says, you were dead in your trespasses. He doesn't say sick in bed. He says dead. So some people might think of Christianity as being like you're dying and you're in your deathbed, you're sick, you're dying, and God gives you the medicine. He puts it right up to your lips, but you still need to lift your head and drink the medicine. Paul doesn't say you're sick. He says you're dead. Now, can dead people bring themselves back to life? No. He raised you to life from death. Exactly. And so that's why it's all attributed to grace. Because if even you just do and to take the medicine, there's a part that you play, and that's not what the Bible says. Jesus alone is our Savior. Precisely. So, I mean, speaking of coming to faith, coming to Christianity, one thing I really want to talk to you, Paul, now that we're like here in person, and you and I haven't actually really talked about this on iProvide channels. I want to talk a little bit about how you came to Christianity, or maybe you were always raised a Christian, but just, I guess, your story of being a Christian, maybe even your parents, their background, that kind of thing. And then maybe I can talk about my experiences as well.
Absolutely. And I think particularly with my story, because even though I was always raised Christian from the beginning, I never wasn't one, really. I had like a little crisis of faith in 2017, but that was, by God's grace, that was over, and it only made me stronger. But apart from that, I think even though I'm a cradle Christian, I think actually my background and my parents' background actually demonstrates beautifully our points about divine providence, how God arranges these things in order to bring his elect to him. So without going into too many details of my family, so both of my parents, they grew up in broken homes, basically, both of them. My dad's side, he's Aussie, and my dad's side goes back to the First Fleet. My mum's side,
the First Fleet, that being the first fleet ships who came to Australia.
Who came to Australia, exactly, under Captain Cook and Arthur Phillip and what have you. My mum's side's Lebanese. They're all from Lebanon. Her side, she lived in Lebanon with her family until like when she was a kid. They were moved out. In summary, to start with my mum's side, family always in Lebanon. Her dad, my pop, died in 2012. He was very politically involved, and I think that's where even though I never talked with him about it because I was too young, but maybe, I don't know, maybe there's some like genetic or like some supernatural thing that carried on to me, because like he was the super political one. But he in Lebanon read all the newspapers, even personally knew politicians and presidents and what have you. He was even, people would even ask him for advice.
And did your family on your mom's side, did they come to Australia during the Civil War?
Well, actually they came before, because my pop, my mum's dad, he actually saw the Civil War coming beforehand. And so he got the family out early.
Yeah.
And they moved to Australia. They eventually visited briefly for one period, but then came back anyway. But even with that, the home was not good. I won't go into detail. It was not a good home. And so my mum would spend a lot of time with the nuns, and even with the Muslim family.
So they were Christians.
It was, yes. So sorry, my pop, my mum's dad, he was Antiochian Orthodox, and so his side was that Antiochian Orthodox in Lebanon. And my mum's side was Maronite, which, if you know the context of the Civil War, that's Romeo and Juliet, because they fought on opposite sides. They were
and that's horrific, Christians fighting on the sides of the Civil
War. Especially when one of those Christian sides is teaming up with Muslims to kill other Christians. That's
terrible,
utterly despicable, pure evil. But in any event, that happened. Home was not great. And so my mum would often spend time with nuns, or even with another local Muslim family here in Australia. And she had a rough upbringing in light of that as well, even in school and what have you. But providentially, one day she would find a Pentecostal church, a local one here in Australia. Which look, obviously they're Pentecostals. We disagree with quite a bit of them, but it helped her and a few of her siblings went to that church as well. It helped them a lot. It straightened them up. And for my dad's side, likewise, again, a bit of a broken home. Won't go into too many details. There was a divorce when he was very young. But he was a bit of, as far as I'm aware, he was a bit of one of the party animals back in the day as well. Yeah. But now, if you meet him today, my dad, one of the most insanely little spoken, humble guys you can ever meet, and hard worker. So after the Holy Spirit reversal with that, he came to that church, and that's where basically all that change happened, pretty much. Coming to this Pentecostal church, he was saved and all that jazz. And that's where he met my mum. They met in that church. At that church, yeah. And so me and my two other siblings, my brother and my sister, both older than me, we grew up for a while in that church. Eventually we left for Hillsong, went there for a while. I was there for about 10 years. And I eventually left that around the beginning of 2021 during the lockdowns, because I basically grew sick of concert worship. I eventually believed this just wasn't proper. And by Providence, I found my Anglican parish that I'm at now. But the most important thing is that how, even though I was a cradle Christian, all that happened not because I was in a line of like Christians per se, because even my dad's side, even though they're like traditionally Anglican, being from the First Fleet here in Australia, they weren't for a bit very religious. My mum's side was very religious, but they were completely different, Maronite and Orthodox. Sure. And even then they were killing each other, so they weren't very Christian in the first place. But by God's providence, he put my parents together from awful backgrounds and they met each other, and they suddenly became an extremely fantastic, well put together home. Really well raised our family, really managed us well. We have a nice place, as you can probably see watching this.
Yeah.
And that's been the environment in which it raised me up to be, as far as the Spirit allows me, to be a decent Christian and to study the truth as deeply as I can, and to pass it on to my own children. So that's my background.
Now, yesterday you told me that there may have been some sort of connection between your ancestor on the First Fleet and your
That's
church.
right, yeah. So at my parish, my ancestor on the First Fleet, he came here at the end of the 18th century, so like right at the start. And I only learned after the fact. I didn't know this when I was looking for a church. I wasn't even looking for an Anglican church. I was looking for any conservative Protestant, quote unquote, church, even if it was like a Baptist one, as long as it's good and conservative and somewhat traditional.
But you were a Calvinist at this time?
Yeah, I was, exactly. I was a Calvinist, and my preference was actually for Presbyterianism, simply because I did believe in original Presbyterian ecclesiology. I still do believe that historically the first ecclesiology was more or less Presbyterian, but I never believed the episcopate was like illegitimate or something like the old Presbyterians. But but in any event, that was even my preference for like a traditional Presbyterian church, like the Geneva gown and what have you. But by Providence, at a Romanist friend's party, I was talking with another Romanist friend there just about Protestantism, Romanism, what have you.
Yeah.
And this other at least raised Romanist lady, she comes up to us, like not like old lady, like she's like mid-20s, whatever.
Yeah.
She comes up to us and she says, "Hey, can I just sit in this discussion, because this is actually kind of interesting for me and all that." And so I eventually pivot towards her, and we start talking, and she's saying, "Oh, look, I'm starting to doubt Roman claims on like grace and justification, what have you." And so now at the same time, curiously enough, with her Roman priest's blessing, which I think he is not allowed to do, she's starting to simultaneously attend an Anglican church. And so she's doing that at the same time. And so I ask her where it is, and she tells me, "Oh, it's so-and-so parish." And I look at it, and it's like, "Oh, that's actually right near me." And so I go visit there, and after visiting both their later, more contemporary service, and then also the more traditional one, I'm like, okay, this is my home. That's it. This is my church home. If you notice, this whole time I wasn't looking for denominations. I wasn't looking, what's the best denomination?
Sure.
I did not care, because with the lockdown situation, it was just that bad. I just needed spiritual food. That's it.
Yeah.
But providentially, I was brought to Anglicanism, to an Anglican church, and not just any Anglican church, but the one which I would later find out that my First Fleet ancestor actually attended, the very same parish. Yeah. And not only that, but when we recently had like a 200 and something anniversary over there, they brought out the old marriage registry book, which is an over 200-year-old book. And the archivist lady, she was there handling it. People could, if they had ancestors, they could tell her where they are or when they were married, and she would flip them over really carefully with her gloves and all that. And we, on the spot, me and my parents found out when our First Fleet ancestor was married, and we looked it up, and it was April 10th, 1797. And so we told the archivist lady that. She flipped over the pages very close to the beginning of the book, basically. And there he was. There's my ancestor right there, Isaac Tarr, right there in his own handwriting. Writing the marriage registry for him and his wife, Elizabeth Crook, on April 10th of 1797.
At the church you now attend.
At the church that I now attend, because... And he's also buried in the cemetery there. And all that, back to my First Fleet ancestors' parish, because I happened at that time to decide to go to a Roman friend's birthday party, and I happened to, at that specific moment, be talking with a Romanist friend about Protestantism and Romanism at the exact time when this girl happened to be within earshot of us, to hear what we were talking about, to get interested.
But now it's all a coincidence.
Start the just all a coincidence, bro.
Yeah.
Complete.
Yeah. So
that's how it happened.
So you were going to Hillsong. Now, were you a Calvinist when you were at Hillsong?
I actually was, yeah. Not for the whole time, but I think I started to think about this better. I started going to Bible college in 2017, and I was I wasn't like a rabid anti-Calvinist, but I kind of like, I don't believe that. I tried to flirt with Molinism for a bit.
Sure.
But I guess I'd pinpoint when I'd started to think that I was pro-Calvinist. Oh, maybe to spitball it, maybe around 2019 or so.
2019.
Yeah, during my Bachelor of Theology.
Just through reading theology.
Yeah, just not even a whole ton of, ironically, not a huge amount of reading, like definitely a bit, but especially the scriptures.
Yeah.
But then also even just listening to Dr. James White, funnily enough, just hearing his Alpha and Omega ministry. And it wasn't even just him, it was just him just saying, look at these passages, look how bloody obvious it is.
Yeah, Romans
and I was just like, I mean, you know, you're right. I mean, even now, I still think, I'm not sure about limited atonement and maybe a couple other things.
Oh, we should talk about that.
Yeah, maybe we should one day. But hey, in my defense, classical reformers, they weren't united on this either. But in any event, so even on things, it's not like me just being a James White stan and drinking everything he says. And obviously, he's a Credo Baptist. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of cringe, bro. But it was just him saying, look at these passages. Look how flipping clear it is. And I'm just like, okay, you know what? You're actually kind of right. And by God's grace, I didn't have the emotional tirade against, oh, God orders everything. That's bad. I want to have a free will.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking.
So I was just able to accept it.
I was talking to a Christian the other day who's like in his 50s. He's been a Christian his whole life, and he said that if the God of Calvinism was true, he wouldn't worship him because he was a moral monster. He said, and he's abhorrent. And I was like, okay, well, what do you do with Romans 9? And he's like, oh, you know, Romans 9, whatever. And I was like, well, let's go through it together because we had all the time in the world. And we opened it up, went through Romans 9 together. And I'm pointing out how just blatantly clear it is. And I said, well, what do you think? And he goes, oh, I think Paul is using this rhetorical device where he's over-exaggerating his point to make it more clear. I'm just like... It's obvious, though, that it's obvious he's saying that because of his emotional resistance.
Yeah.
But okay, so you were a Calvinist Pentecostal. I mean, that has been known to happen. It is kind of rare, admittedly, to be a Pentecostal and a Calvinist.
Yeah, they do exist. They do exist. And honestly, just as a brief aside, I actually think in retrospect they go like insanely well together. For the simple reason that obviously the emphasis on Pentecostalism is the Holy Spirit and like the Holy Spirit empowering signs and wonders and miracles.
Yeah. And people say that Calvin is the theologian of the Holy Spirit.
Exactly, yeah. And that's the whole thing with Calvinism. The emphasis is on like you cannot do this or that without the Holy Spirit. So honestly, it just kind of makes sense in that respect. Now, obviously, Calvin being a cessationist, you would have to ignore that. But I mean, apart from that,
sure. No,
but in the end, it doesn't matter for me because I'm not like... I still hold some Pentecostal views in certain respects, but I don't call myself a Pentecostal just because, in terms of my actual affiliation, I'm an Anglican. So, yeah. You came to you didn't want to become an Anglican, but you ended up going to this church, and now you've embraced Anglicanism. Exactly, and again, that's another providential thing. Apart from my ancestor, was that the week after I joined, that's when so people can actually time this. People can go to my channel. They can see my live stream reacting to the 39 articles of religion. And that was a week after I first visited the church, and I decided that I was going to go there. And so I wanted to be a man of principle and consistency. And so I'm thinking, okay, this is an Anglican church. Let's see what they believe and whether I can actually line up with that. And I just did a live reaction to the 39 articles of religion. I'd only ever seen little bits and pieces of them before, but this is like, I went through the whole thing in that stream. And so I went through it and I found myself agreeing with like over like 95% of it. But the bits I had to disagree with at that time were on the efficacy of baptism and on the Eucharist, because at that time I was just an open, unashamed memorialist with respect to the Eucharist. No real presence in any sense whatsoever. Although I could slightly understand the Calvinist spiritual presence view, but I kind of thought that was just a bit long-winded. And I was like that for a while afterwards. So I just held to that tension, like, yeah, okay, and whatever. In the end, it's a faithful church. But over time, by God's grace, I actually saw the wisdom in what those articles were saying. And this was in a sense how the authority of even a lesser confession like that would work on me. Because even though I didn't think it's a confession that came straight from the mouth of God and I'm bound to believe it, nonetheless, because I took it seriously, I decided, okay, I take this confession very seriously and I revere it. So what about these things that I disagree with it on? Maybe I'm wrong. And so I eventually decided.
So you're telling me that you have private judgment and you assented to authority that you believe is fallible. Wait, so hold on, Paul. You're telling me that you can have private judgment, believe in sola scriptura, and assent to authority.
Believe it or not, yes. Believe it or not. And here's the crazier part. My parents are fallible.
No.
My parents are fallible.
But-
and yet I obey my... Will we leave that in? Maybe we will. I think we will. But that's definitely a topic for another day, I guess. Yeah. But point being, obviously there was a confessional authority over my parish and I guess in a way over me. But in the end, obviously, you know, every Christian has an intellect to have to wrestle with these things individually. And so insofar as the compilation of a confession is not an infallible process, we have the right to question those things, as the scriptures themselves say, test every spirit.
Yeah, but I've used this example before of explaining how private judgment works, where I didn't agree with all of the articles when I became an Anglican, but I just thought, okay, I'm just going to assent to them anyway. You assent to authority.
There you go. Yeah.
And I also assent to them in their originally intended meaning.
Sorry, Anglo-Catholics.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Well, I want to talk about Anglicanism a few, but maybe I could
but quickly before that as well. And so I even though I disagreed initially with what the article said about the Eucharist and baptism, precisely because I revered them and I took them as a serious authority, I decided, okay, I'm going to give them that deference and I'm going to actually study these issues. And by God's grace, I ended up finding, actually, no, they're spot on about those things. Baptism does save you. There is a real power in baptism. When you're baptized, it's not just a symbolic public profession of faith. You're actually, when Paul says you're baptized into Christ, he means you're baptized into Christ. I always just like casually read those passages like, oh, he's just using the language and symbols of baptism to describe your spiritual faith. And but hang on, what reason is there for that? He's saying you're baptized into Christ simpliciter. That's it. Baptism is a rite in the Christian church. And so what else do you take from that except how in some mystical way that when you really do go under and out of the waters of baptism, you're really united with Christ through faith in some way.
Yeah.
So I just casually took that on. And then likewise, of course, unless you're born of water and spirit, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. And obviously, there's the kind of the cope, Calvin, of the birth canal fluids or whatever, which is like, okay, that's kind of cringe. But then likewise with the Lord's Supper, I do believe that the words of institution can consistently be read in a symbolic way, whereas this is my body. You can say that in the same way as like you pull up a photo of your mum, you say this is my mum, but you don't mean the photo is just the substance of your mum. It's a symbol of it.
Yeah.
But you have Paul in 1 Corinthians 10 or 11, I think, where he says, is not the bread that we eat a participation in the body of Christ? And is not the cup that we drink, is that not a participation or in the blood of Christ? And when he says that, it's like, okay, so this is more, that's not, participation isn't mere symbology. That's not what participation is. There is in some real sense that as we eat this bread and we drink this wine, that we really do in some way consume the body and blood of Christ.
And that's simply because God doesn't make empty promises.
Exactly.
So if Jesus says, this is my blood shed for you for the forgiveness of sins, that's a promise he makes, and God doesn't make empty promises.
Exactly.
So by him making the promise, by that promise, it's conveying the grace that it's signifying.
Precisely.
Yeah. Well, I want to share a little bit about, I guess, my journey to Christianity then,
yes,
and then we'll talk about
we'll definitely talk more about Anglicanism.
First of all, this is a really fascinating story of your family. It's amazing. And this, the providential guidance of how you go to the same church as your ancestors is just amazing. My sort of ancestral heritage isn't as interesting as yours. My parents were Baptists when I was a little kid. Went to a Baptist church in Kerikeri, that's in northern New Zealand, and but I have no memories of us ever going to church. And then we moved to England. We lived there for 10 years, and the whole time in England, 10 years, never went to church once as a family, even though my parents were Christian. But we never prayed as a family, really.
Sheesh.
They never read the Bible to us. I remember I don't remember this, but it's a story my family tells all the time. My brother came home from school one day in tears, and he was like 10 and he'd been raised a Christian for 10 years. Came in tears and said, "They killed Jesus. They killed him. Jesus died." He never knew that Jesus. I mean, so for us, Jesus was basically like a wise old sage sort of thing.
Right.
But I went to a Church of England school, so we had chapel every day, and then every other Saturday we'd have a lengthy chapel service with a sermon. So I was getting a sort of Christian education. We had religious studies there as well, but it was all very nominal, and the gospel wasn't really preached to me. We moved back to New Zealand in 2010. I was 14, and then became friends with a girl, and ended up going to her youth group, which is at a charismatic church. And it was at that charismatic church that I first heard the gospel preached to me, that Jesus Christ came to die for sinners and that sort of thing. And then became a Christian really for the first time. Then I hadn't been baptized or anything, of course, I'm Baptist. And then I got baptized at the age of 15 in this charismatic church. But it was all very rushed, you see. Like I met this girl and I liked her, and then we joined this youth group, and everyone in the youth group was so lovely to me. And at high school, I was not popular at high school. I didn't have a lot of friends. I got picked on quite a bit, and then go to this youth group, and everyone's lovely and kind and inviting, and you hear the gospel, and it's all happened so fast. And then I get baptized and blah, blah, blah. But then I started to get some doubts and some concerns. This church is very charismatic. They would do speaking in tongues spontaneously, but also people passing out, fainting, lying on the ground, rolling around, flapping like a fish spontaneously. All this sort of thing would happen. And it would happen to all my friends in the youth group. It never happened to me. And they started to say, River, we're worried that you don't have the Holy Spirit because you're not speaking in tongues. You're not falling on the ground. You're not being overcome with the Spirit. And that really did not sit well with me. And I started to think, is this real? And I got a very uncomfortable feeling in like my gut whenever I'd see things like that happen. I just thought, this isn't right. Something's weird here. Something's not going well. But they would do faith healing. It would never work. People go in a wheelchair, they come out in a wheelchair. And I'm just starting to think, is this all real? Is this all legit? And then the problem of evil came up as well in my mind. Yeah. How does God allow suffering? That sort of thing. This church was very much like a libertarian free will sort of thing. And so age of 16, about 6 months after I got baptized, I left the church and left Christianity, dropped out of Christianity, and just thought this was all a crazy period of my life where I think I just got a bit caught up in the emotion of it all and started believing in things that don't make sense. But I never stopped believing in God, which is very important. I've never been an atheist because I just think God is just so obviously true. It's always just made zero sense to me that this is all, some sort of coincidence or whatever. It's just so stupid. Believe in God, but I just thought, well, how does this all work? And I actually settled on pantheism. Yeah, I know. At 16. And so I believed that the whole cosmos is God, so to speak. There is a slight sense of consciousness or sentience. Basically what it is the whole cosmos is God self-actualizing. So God the universe / God creates eyes so that he can see, so that he can have an image. He creates ears so that he can be heard, or so that there can be sound. So it's all, and this is kind of Hegelian actually. It's all self-actualizing. And with the Hegelian thing as well, there's a darker side. This is also like, the Kabbalistic Judaism has this as well. There's a dark side to God and there's a light side to God. Also in Star Wars, with the Force as a dark side and light side. Yeah. So God wants to self-actualize his dark side, and he wants to also self-actualize his good side. So that's why there's goodness, and I believed that there is such a thing as morality as a pantheist. But it's all through this sort of spectrum of dark and light. So there is love, there is charity, there is goodness, there's also darkness, evil, that sort of thing. And God actually wants both sides to be self-actualized so that he can come into more and more existence. So all of existence is God being birthed, giving birth to himself, so to speak, becoming more himself. That's what I believe. It's completely ludicrous nonsense. And this actually informs pantheistic practice. So, you might notice that a lot of these sort of sexually adventurous people who are into polyamory and drugs and that sort of thing, pantheists. Now, I wasn't into that. I mean, I was actually taking a lot of drugs at this time. I was smoking weed quite often, and I was having premarital sex and regularly with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. So we started dating at the age of 16, and we're still married today with son. And but in any case, it's because there's a sense in which your darker sides to who you are. Your darker side isn't necessarily per se completely bad. You actually want to explore that side. So that's what they always say, right? You want to explore yourself, or explore your fantasies, they'll often say, or explore those things, because you want to be self-actualized. You want to be birthed. Right. You want every nook and cranny of your brain, of your mind, of your soul to sort of be experienced and explored and come into the light. And so, this isn't Hegel. This is where you get the Hegelian dialectic from, right? Where the universe is about two dichotomies being created so that there can be a synthesis. So there's thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Yeah. And by the way, this is their entire globalist plot. It's because they're all Hegelian Fabian socialists. And so that's why they created capitalism and communism as the false dichotomy. Of course, capitalism and communism are basically just the same thing. It's materialistic, globalist economic systems as a false dichotomy, so they can create a synthesis of not market capitalism. What
like democratic socialism.
Yeah, democratic socialism. But they actually call it now. It's called is it called shareholder capitalism, or this sort of new way of
There's always
capitalism.
A bunch of skin suit terms, I guess, for it.
Yeah, but China is a good field test for it, right? Sort of communist and capitalist.
Yeah,
and that actually all comes from Hegel. This idea of these two dichotomies needing to be synthesized. Anyway, so that's what I believe for some time.
What a roller coaster.
Yeah.
So my roller coaster is more my family background. I had a couple of bumps, but otherwise it's mostly my family background. But yours is just your life.
Yeah. But so although I unequivocally reject pantheism and my beliefs, you can sort of see where I'm coming from. So believe that there is divinity, that there is this is created by a being, and trying to grapple with the problem of evil, trying to grapple with the fact that I know that love exists and I know that evil exists, and how can that be? And so just believing that they have their own existence and it's two sides of this mind. Anyway, but I started reading Dostoevsky. So I read Crime and Punishment, Notes from Underground, The Idiot, Demons, Brothers Karamazov. And that was a major push towards Christianity for me. Everything started to click into place reading Dostoevsky. Read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. And then, honestly, probably the writer who's had the most impact on my coming to Christianity, like the final push, would be N.T. Wright, actually. So I started reading him because he's got some great historical defenses of like the reliability of the Gospels and that sort of thing.
And the resurrection.
Because I got really into that. I got interested in Christianity, and I believed in all this Bart Ehrman stuff, that it's all forgeries and it's all made up. And I wanted to get the other side. And that's why I read N.T. Wright. And he makes great arguments. But I have to say, in this whole time, looking back over it, it was very clear that I wanted Christianity to be true. Like, I wouldn't be spending so much time reading Dostoevsky and reading all of Mere Christianity and getting into N.T. Wright if I didn't want this to somehow be true. And I think that God put that in me, this longing for him. And I started to realize that pantheism can't be true because of its logical problems. Essentially, it has the same problem that atheism has, which is, how did this start in the first place? And it's got other issues as well. It actually can't solve the problem of evil. The fact that it's like this dark side, light side is not the solution to the problem.
All right.
So, and then I just came to Christianity through those means. But I also started having some pretty wild dreams. I don't even know how appropriate it is to talk about them. Not because they're inappropriate, just because I don't want people to get the impression that if you don't have amazing dreamlike experiences, that God's not working in your life, or your conversion's not valid.
You can just qualify that, I guess. But
I mean, one dream I had, and when I woke up from this dream, that was sort of like I'm giving my life to Christ, and I'm going to find a church and I'm going to attend it this Sunday. What happened was, in my dream, I was in downtown Henderson, which is where I live. Not the most socially, economically prestigious place. It's
Right.
kind of a dangerous place sometimes. I was there at night, and I was being chased by this mob of like demon-possessed people chasing me.
So this is a dream, to clarify.
This is the dream.
It's not real.
And they oh no, I've actually jumped the gun. Before that happened, I'm walking alone at night down the street, and then when there's like heat on the road,
Yeah,
and
right.
there's the kind of like vibrations.
Yeah.
It was like that, this
Mirage.
vibration, but in like the shape of a person, and it just said "eat," and that's when the mob came, and then they got hold of me, and they tried to eat me alive. And they like were ripping off my clothes and blah, blah, blah. I'm now, naked at this point just to be R18 about it. And then I managed to break free from the crowd. I keep running. I get to this castle. I get inside the castle. And in the room, there's a fountain with a lion's head, but no water's coming out of its mouth. And then behind the fountain is a spiral staircase going up. And then this door at the top of the spiral staircase opens, light, blindingly bright light pours out of the door, and then I can barely look at it, so bright, and then I see that the light is moving down the stairs, and then I immediately knew that that's Jesus Christ walking down the stairs, shining this white light. You can't even look at him. And he gets to the bottom of the stairs, and I fell prostrate before him, and I just thought, all I want to do is worship him and kiss his feet. And I go to kiss his feet, and then he just says, drink. And then this fountain turns on, this water starts gushing out of this lion's mouth. And I crawl up to the water and start drinking from the water. And then the doors blast open behind me, and the mob that was trying to eat me come in. And then they've all come to their senses now, and they all sit around me, and we all drink from this water together. And I woke up just crying.
That is insane.
Yeah.
What?
And I just thought, oh my gosh, Jesus is Lord. It's all real.
That is insane.
Yeah.
What do I even say about that? What the
That's
heck?
crazy, right?
That's nuts.
Yeah. So I just thought, I'm not going to waste any time. I got to go to church now. No, I'd already sort of thought through some of the stuff. So I'd been really interested in early Christianity and early church. So I dabbled a little bit into like Ignatius and Clement.
Ah, nice.
And the Didache. And I had decided that Anglicanism, Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, these are the ones who have it right. So bishops, high sacramental theology, traditional worship, vestments. I just hated anything modern, anything, because I should also say at this point, this is all in 2016, by the way. I should give the timelines.
So when I was in high school, basically.
Yeah. I had also gone through like a conservative political conversion, like a lot of people did around this time, where I realized that right-wing political thought is definitely the way, that liberalism is a cancer, that SJWism is a mental illness, that Marxism has a nefarious control over the world. I've gotten red-pilled on things like 9/11, JFK, that sort of thing. So I think that's actually an important part of how this all happened. I also had a dream around this time that Donald Trump was going to win the election. This was when he wasn't even the Republican nominee. And in that dream, God revealed some things to me about how there's an evil societies and stuff who run the world and that kind of thing. Yeah, crazy. It was a weird time. I haven't had dreams like that since. Lots of weird dreams, prophetic dreams were happening around this time. Anyway, so I kind of already decided that those more traditional branches of Christianity were the way to go. So I picked an Anglican church that was nearby and traditional Anglo-Catholic, started attending them. And then a couple of months later, my wife also converted to Christianity as well. And that was also big and emotional for her too, but I maybe that's for another time. So she converted to Christianity, I converted to Christianity, became Anglicans, we got confirmed. And then a lot of the rest is actually on YouTube, where I moved out of Anglo-Catholicism and into Reformed Anglicanism. Because of things like the sovereignty of God, the sola gratia, how synergism actually takes away from the grace of our salvation, and you don't want to cope around the articles. Don't want to cope around the articles. That's actually a big one. Yeah, because I was coping around the articles, And then
it's only the Romish doctrine of purgatory. Anything else is okay.
That's right. And then realizing that sola scriptura is biblical, is logical, is valid. And then also realizing that praying to saints and worshiping images is idolatry, which is a big one as well.
Right.
So I had that experience, and then here we are. So there you go.
Exactly.
That's my story.
That's a freaking insane story on your personal path. The dreams are nuts. I've had cooked dreams, but they're all just of no significance. They're just cooked for the sake of it, not of like prophetic import. I've had a dream of like having like a miniature roller coaster in my old bedroom, and and me and my friends have had crazy dreams about me. But in any event, that's a good point of going how your divine providence has basically led us both in interesting backgrounds through to the faith. For me, it started with my parents. With you, it was really in your own life. But that eventually culminated in leading us to the Anglican tradition. And so with that respect, why then do you think, I'll start with you. We'll start with you first, I guess, since you're already on a roll here, and then I can just discuss on my end.
Yeah.
Why Anglicanism? Like, obviously we say why because, God deemed it to be that way. Sure. But what means, I guess, in the way, what means did God use to bring you to Anglicanism? What made you think Anglicanism is the way? And not even just the stuff when you became an Anglo-Catholic, but even just like now your more mature thoughts on why are you an Anglican? Why aren't you a Presbyterian or a Baptist or a Romanist or whoever? Why?
Yeah. Well, I guess there's I decided to become an Anglican twice, really. I decided to become an Anglican when I became a Christian in 2016, and then I had to reconsider everything. I forget the year. I mean, it's on YouTube. It's the year that I made the video. I've changed my mind on some things. I think maybe that was 2020 or 2021. I could probably look it up now, but I can't be bothered. So it was something 2020, 2021, one of those times. I had to reconsider everything, and I sort of decided once again to be Anglican, to remain Anglican. So the first time was, I believed that the early church was Episcopal in structure. I've now since realized that
nuance that a bit.
Yeah, it's a bit over exaggerated. But that's what I thought anyway. And then liturgy. Very liturgical. I wanted liturgy. I wanted tradition. I sort of went through this trad phase. I hated modernity. I hated anything new, anything modern. I wanted traditional, I wanted old ways.
Death to the guitar mass.
But that's also part of the draw of pantheism, because you can tie in some of that sort of ancient, sort of European weird, wacko stuff. Anyway, so wanted that. And high view of sacraments, because reading the scriptures and the early church, I just thought it was pretty obvious. The sacraments are effectual means of grace. And as for why Anglicanism rather than Roman Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy, I just felt like Anglicanism had more of the simplicity of early Christianity, whereas it seemed to me that that Romanism and Orthodoxy have all these additions. There's this and there's that and there's the Pope and there's praying to saints and all these additions. I just thought that's obviously just added. I want back to the basics, early Christianity, the kind of church that Ignatius would have gone to. And I feel like Anglicanism was the closest. Also at that time, I think I pretty much said all that. So that's why I went to Anglicanism that time. And then in terms of the second time, why I remained Anglican rather than just embracing, becoming Reformed or Presbyterian or whatever. And sometimes people online will be like, "Oh, why do you just become Presbyterian?" Because I actually believe in the 39 Articles of Religion.
Wow, shocker.
Well, first of all, I don't think that Anglicanism is the only correct branch of Christianity.
In the sense of like God doesn't only work here.
No. I mean, I have absolutely no problems whatsoever with Presbyterians. I think they're not missing out on almost anything that we have. I mean, we have a liturgical heritage, which is lovely, which I think is superior to theirs, and we have the episcopal structure. I think is better, practically speaking, than a Presbyterian structure. What I mean is, it's not like you're less saved or you have less grace, and you're just absolutely ridiculous. So Presbyterian Reformed, or whatever.
Yeah, we're just better than the Presbyterian.
But so first of all, that doesn't really matter that much, and because of that, I mean, I'd already been an Anglican. All my friends were Anglican and everything, and so there's sort of no real motivation to stop being Anglican if I'm already in that world. But still, I do fundamentally believe that Episcopal Church, it's a hard word to say, Episcopal or Episcopal.
Please don't say Episcopal, just Episcopal.
Is a better structure than Presbyterianism, because I think committees, I just don't like committees. And I think these sort of liberal type people, they love committees.
Yeah.
And I like the idea that pastors have their pastor, the pastor's pastor,
exactly,
your bishop. Yeah. And now that I'm an ordained clergyman, I can see that really clearly. I have, I have a priest above me because I'm a curate, but I also have a bishop who I can turn to, who can be my pastor. And it's good to. I'm not like a democratic kind of person. I don't really believe in democracy.
Exactly.
I mean, I do. In certain respects, but I don't believe in democracy as much as we have it in the West today.
Yeah.
So I do like the autocratic system of the buck stops with one guy, the bishop, and the bishop can just say no, or he can say no, and I like that. I think that's good, and I do believe it's biblical because I believe the apostles. I think there's a 3-tiered clerical orders in the Bible. I think you've got the apostles, the presbyters / the episcopos. I believe they're obviously interchangeable words. It's absolutely ludicrous when people argue for three. It's obviously interchangeable.
Yeah.
But that's not the point. The point is the apostles are the top tier. So apostles, presbyters, deacons.
Yeah.
The apostles die. I believe that bishops replace that. Or obviously nowhere near as much authority as apostles, but in the sense that Paul is the apostle over the churches in Corinth, Galatia, Ephesus, Rome, and then there's presbyters in all those churches, and that's the idea of a diocese or a province, and I agree with all that. So there is that, and then the main thing is simply the liturgy, the Book of Common Prayer is just unbeatable. I've attended Reformed churches before, like Dutch Reformed. And you're just sitting down for 2 hours and listening to some guy talk. Like, you really are. I mean, you stand up for the hymns, but there's no
call and response.
There's no call and response. And I just can't stand that. I don't think that's biblical for starters. I think the Bible actually wants liturgical worship. I have an article on that. But it's also just boring and not engaging. And it's your body is basically just the transportation device for your brain, you know. And I like Anglican liturgy. So it's liturgy and episcopal and leadership. And in my opinion, this might bother some people. I'm sure it will, but I don't care. I think Episcopal church structure and the Book of Common Prayer, our liturgical heritage, are really the only distinguishing features between us and Presbyterians. Like, our theology is... there's a few little things.
Yeah, I guess.
But when it comes down to it.
Because, I mean, in the end, they were an iteration of the English Church as well, with the Westminster Confession, at least, So, so we share a lot with them. But
I mean, they're more explicit about double predestination in the Westminster Confession. But what I mean is, as a Calvinist Anglican, and I have Calvinist Presbyterian friends, what is the actual practical difference between us? It's really only our church structure for Episcopal church leadership and the liturgies we use.
Yeah. I think the articles. I think the articles do deliberately leave some questions a bit more open. So that allows some people who may not agree with certain Westminster standards in our.
But let's think Doug Wilson. Like Doug Wilson's sort of flavor of Presbyterianism, like with his church in Moscow, Idaho. I agree with Doug Wilson. I mean, I'm really outing myself now. You agree with Doug Wilson? I agree with him.
Why do you hate your wife? Tune in next time.
I agree with him on a substantial amount of stuff, and really the only main disagreements would be to do with Episcopal versus Presbyterian structure and liturgy. But he's big on liturgy anyway, so it's not really that big a difference. Yeah.
Well, even those two things, even though it's only two numerically things, they are big things. Not to the sense of like, oh, you're different, you're like a heathen and a tax collector, or like your salvation's in danger or whatever. But in terms of distinguishing marks, they're quite significant. episcopal versus and liturgical marks.
I think it's over exaggerated how different they are.
Some can, so yeah, like in terms, like with people who talk like whether they're Anglo-Catholics or Romanists or Easterns, whatever, where it's like, all the early church are bishops, but you guys just have a group of presbyters, apostolics. It's just like, calm down. It wasn't there wasn't any pretense of just the magic cheese touch, as one of my friends put it. That's exclusively comes from one monarchic bishop down to another, and not through the other presbyters ever as well. That wasn't.
I actually believe Presbyterians have apostolic succession as well. By the way,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, spicy take, I know, but
I mean, like, there are differences, but they're not like there's nowhere close to us being like different religions or something.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not at all.
Yeah.
And I can see that. And in fact, the other day, I advised someone on Facebook Messenger who reached out to me through my YouTube stuff to join the Presbyterian church rather than an Anglican church recently. Because the Anglican option, even though it was in the ACNA, is really liberal, right? Like that diocese ordains women, and it's not really Anglican.
That's bad. Okay, that's
versus a Geneva Gown High Church Presbyterian that's really conservative, Christian nationalist sort of thing. I mean, I in a heartbeat pick the Presbyterian option,
100%.
over the Anglican option. So, and then, but even like with differences between Anglicans and Lutherans, sometimes people like Lutherans can be funny online. They can kind of, sometimes you get the feeling that they think that if you're not Lutheran, you're like a heretic. By the way, where I live in New Zealand, it is not possible for me to become a Lutheran. Okay? There is one Lutheran church in my city. It's one of the largest cities in the world. It would be an hour-long drive for me to get to that church. It's a liberal church. That's it. So do you want me to, Lutherans, if you want me to be Lutheran, do you want me to move country? Do you?
How about you do your gospel duty?
Yeah.
Send some missionaries over to plant a new church.
Now, Lutherans and I would have disagreements over double predestination, limited atonement, and particularly baptismal regeneration. I really even think that those differences are kind of overblown.
Oh yeah.
I can see why Lutherans would want baptismal regeneration, why Calvinists would want baptismal efficacy. Now, why do I go for efficacy and not regeneration? It's because I believe in the sovereignty of God's grace, where God, if he gives you salvific grace, you will be saved, right? So that's, and so that as a logical necessity must mean that some people, when they get baptized, do not receive salvific grace.
Right.
And then we have to figure out what's going on there, and there's a reason for it. And so it's the sovereignty of God's grace. Right. I want to protect the fact that if God gives you salvific grace, you will be saved. And I understand, as on the other hand, why Lutherans would want to protect the objectivity of baptism, where it always regenerates you, because they want your assurance to be fixed to the objectivity of the sacraments. I've been baptized, and therefore I can be 100% certain that God has given me saving grace. I completely understand that, and I can see the biblical basis for it. But I can also understand, because I believe in it, why I would want my assurance to actually be hinged on the sovereignty of God's grace, right, and the fact that I will persevere in the faith. And can't Lutherans just cut us some slack and understand that you can see that there's a reason why people believe these two things, and practically speaking, it doesn't really make that much of a difference.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, sorry, that was a long answer.
That was long-winded, a lot of very good and detailed answers.
So over to you then, Paul. Why are you an Anglican?
Why am I an Anglican?
Yeah.
So as I mentioned with my own conversion journey, well, not really conversion journey, but journey to Anglicanism, it wasn't really a journey to Anglicanism. At least I didn't think it was. It was just, again, during that period, during the lockdown, just wanted to find any decent conservative church. And by the incredible divine providence, as described earlier, that I eventually found this particular parish without regard for its denomination. I decided to call it home. And then I thought, okay, it's an Anglican place. Let's see what they believe. And initially, I didn't agree with every article of the 39 Articles. Now I do. And I can still admit that, like for example, almost all, not every single one, but almost all of the OG Anglican authors and framers thought that the episcopacy, the three-tier, was divinely established. And that is even at the preface of the ordinal, where it says that Christ himself established the bishop, priest, and deacon. And so I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, I just have to bite the bullet. Historically, I don't think that's the case. But in the end, with respect to the foundations of the Anglican system, what nonetheless I believe helps me identify fundamentally as an Anglican is, well, one, I still uphold all the articles of religion. Two, I still do believe the episcopacy is not only good, but even the superior system, as River just demonstrated over there. And likewise, our liturgy, which is really that's really the ultimate public symbol of our identity, the BCP. And I adore that. I love to pray it. Yeah. But ultimately, the big question, I again, providentially, I came to Anglicanism and I came to agree with all the articles, including on the Eucharist and on baptism. But over time, the particular area of study that's just still ongoing for years now that I'm particularly interested in is, Romanists may know it as fundamental theology, or the fundamental basics of theology, prolegomena, theological authority, whatever you want to call it. Like, where is our theology grounded upon? What's the grounding of what we believe as Christians? As simple as that. And what I eventually came to see is that actually, even in the Reformation, like the Reformation had actually a much more nuanced view than you often hear today, like from certain Baptists or like quasi-Baptist type people who talk about sola scriptura, for example. They make it extremely more simplistic than actually the Reformation as a whole, whether it was Anglican, Lutheran, or Reformed, than they believed. But in particular, I believe the Anglican authors were bang on the money, have been bang on the money on the question where Scripture is absolutely supreme. And unparalleled from other authorities, whether it be popes or councils or other alleged traditions and what have you. But nonetheless, there is still the real sense of the divine authority, divine authority, quote unquote.
Divinely instituted authority.
Sure, yeah, divinely instituted, that's the way to put it. Divinely instituted authority of the church, whether uppercase C or lowercase c, with local and regional churches, with your bishops, with your priests, but also even of, strictly speaking, extra-biblical tradition in the sense of the testimony of the fathers in various respects. There is a real sense of that authority, and it goes into nuance in order to see how that's actually a real thing, because obviously many Protestant apologists admittedly will try to say, oh, we don't believe the Bible's the only authority, it's just supreme. And there are other authorities though, but they never kind of elaborate, okay, what does that mean if the Scripture is the only supreme authority? I won't elaborate on that now. If people want to see it, go to Redeemed Zuma's channel. I did an interview on his channel addressing that exact question. What does it mean in light of sola scriptura for things like the church and tradition to have authority? I go into great detail with that, so do go to his channel and watch that. Point being, I saw what the Anglican writers would say about things like that, whether it be John Jewell, Edward Stillingfleet, to an extent, not as much, but to an extent Cranmer, Richard Hooker, Richard Field, a lesser known one. He's basically what Richard Hooker and his work, the Laws of Ecclesiastical Polity, what that was against the Puritans. Richard Field's massive work of the church was against Rome. Really good, recommend that. But yeah, Field, Bishop Simon Patrick in particular, his short treatise, A Discourse About Tradition. All these authors, I believe, both individually in some of them, but also as a collective whole when taken together, it's just the most perfect synthesized articulation of theological authority just out there, period. Just how to negotiate the relationship of Scripture, the church, and tradition and what have you, such that no other tradition equals, in my opinion. And so that's the fundamental reason why, that's in terms of fundamental grounding, that's why I'm an Anglican, because we're bang on the money in that question, such that even though I may disagree, admittedly, with something in our own ordinal, which is authoritative, case in point where it says in the preface, Christ established a 3-tier office, and we disagree with that historically. Nonetheless, we can still, at least I can still, in good conscience, claim the name Anglican, precisely because we recognize in principle that even our own confessions could err in a certain respect. And so our own principles, which we establish, would be the means by which the correction would happen. And so in light of that, we can say, look, in light of the very authority system established by the Anglican tradition, we can see that, I don't know, let's say this statement in the books of homilies, for example, is not quite true, for example. So that issue of conflict or whatever is more apparent in the books of homilies with respect to beliefs, because they're much bigger and there's very much diversity of authors. You were just talking about with me about that yesterday on the train, how some of them were written basically by like the Anglo-Papalists pretty much at some point, others by more Reformed. Likewise, the ordinal issue. But in the end, to kind of summarize that, I guess, as you said, the liturgy, start with that fundamental authority, such that even with disagreement on certain things, I can still say that I hold to that fundamental authority as held by the Anglican tradition. such that it allows for self-reform if necessary. But then also moving on from that, the episcopate, I 100% agree with you. It is the superior system, even if not directly established by the apostles.
Yeah.
But also, likewise, for the devotional and spiritual aspects, our liturgy, it really is, in my opinion, the greatest liturgical expression of the faith out there, period, second only to the Bible. And so that's why I love my Anglican identity. I cherish it and I identify it, and I always will, basically.
Awesome. I want to actually add to this whole assenting to fallible authority thing, because I feel like this is one of the hot topics of the current discourse on YouTube. People sort of sometimes freak out about that. Like, how can I assent to something that might be wrong? We've already given examples. A wife submits to her husband despite him being fallible children of their parents. But with theology, I think that there's only a very small number of theological systems you can actually read out of Scripture, right? So obviously we grant as Orthodox Christians that the Holy Trinity is very clearly in Scripture, including the Old Testament. I'm so glad that conservative Christianity has ditched this stupid view that used to be popular, where the Holy Trinity is not in the Old Testament at all. I'll give you a great example of the Holy Trinity in Scripture in one verse, Psalm 45. Therefore God, the Son, your God, the Father, has anointed you with the Holy Spirit. Trinity. Psalm 45. So anyway, obviously you get the Holy Trinity, the two natures of Christ, etc., etc. Okay, what about theological systems in terms of sovereignty, free will, grace, salvation, justification, sacraments? There's only a small number of legitimate readings you can have. And let's just say within Protestantism, I think it's very fair enough to say that we have, after 2,000 years of thought and debate and study, all the options are currently available to you. As in, I don't think there's a way of reading the Scriptures and creating a theological system that we haven't already discovered. Yeah. And that basically does narrow it down, in my view, to Lutheranism, Reformed theology, and then to throw them a bone, you could say Arminianism and whatnot. And so those are the options you have. And I believe that the Anglican formularies are basically, like the 39 Articles, 100% correct. And that's, people freak out. Well, it's fallible. What an enormous coincidence that this document is 100% correct.
Yes.
I'm saying it's actually not that big of a coincidence. I might disagree with you there. I just say okay, and that's pretty much what I mean. Yeah. I mean, you could say that, but I'm just saying I don't even think it's that much of a coincidence. I think the Bible's pretty clear. I think there are disagreements, like with Lutherans, for instance, and only one of us is going to be right. And I don't think there's any other option. I think it's either Lutheranism or Reformed theology, in my opinion. And so, anyway, that's just a little throwaway point. Now, Paul, we haven't talked about this before, but I just thought to make it fun, we can cut this part out if you want. Since we're both here, how about we do an opportunity? I ask you a question and you have to answer it.
Oh, crap.
And you ask me a question I have to answer. But I mean, it can be a little bit spicy, maybe political or theological, nothing too personal or weird.
Oh, okay. I'm still thinking of one. You want to start?
I haven't thought of one.
You haven't thought of one?
We're going to have to think about it. Oh, no, I've got one.
Okay.
Do you think, because you've recently done a video on Christian nationalism. So obviously you're a Christian nationalist.
Shock and horror.
But shock and horror. Part of the Christian nationalist discussion is the authority of the state and that sort of thing. Do you think that, and give a quick answer, not too long, do you think that it's ever okay if there's no lesser magistrate who's on your side for lay people, for the general populace, to, with the use of, I want to be careful with my words so that we're not sort of being pinged on the YouTube algorithm, through the use of force, harmful force, topple the secular state and establish a Christian nation?
Very short answer, yes.
Okay.
Slightly less short answer. Again, if there is no lesser magistrate, like we were talking yesterday, there's really no such thing as a lesser magistrate where we are. The government's kind of a monolith everywhere.
This is the people, and then there's the monolithic government.
Exactly, yeah. But in light of that, the people can rise up in principle, but the conditions for that are so bloody narrow. because in many times one biblical reason against revolution for most of the time is actually a practical one, just because it'll cause a lot more harm than the current tyrannical situation.
Sure.
However, if there is such a guarantee where one can reasonably guarantee a successful uprising against a truly evil government that is actively destroying and killing its people, whatever means by which it's doing that, and there can be a guarantee that there can be a successful revolution in order to stop that, that can happen in principle, because in effect, and that it can be done, which requires good, wise, and able leadership from the people to do that. But in doing so, in those leaders coming up from the people to galvanize the people against the state, those leaders are effectively becoming magistrates themselves.
Exactly.
And which is how it's often happened historically.
They have to legitimize themselves.
Exactly.
Whereas if it was like a group of lay people who were like 5 people who have an assassination plot where they're going to poison the tea of the whole cabinet and no one else knows about it, would you say that's not okay? But if it's like a sort of a big organization, sort of
exactly, like a popular front, I don't know, rises up.
That has legitimacy.
That has at least some self-contained legitimacy. People coming in together, they truly choose, here's our leader, and the leaders are like, I decree that we fight over and own and destroy the government. Yeah, that can be legitimate.
And do you think they can set up a Christian nation by force, even if the Christians are the minority of the populace?
Yes, in the sense that it's a nation run well, both tables of the law. Now, in principle versus prudence, there's obviously a big difference there. If the Christians are a minority, prudentially, you probably don't want to enforce that only Christian worship is allowed publicly.
Mm-hmm.
If it's Christianity is a minority, that probably won't work. But if for whatever reason you can guarantee the conditions, however big Christianity is there, that you can maintain order while enforcing the whole of God's law, at least publicly, yeah, absolutely, you can do that. That's absolutely. In fact, the government should be doing that.
And we're not saying that we should be doing this because you've already said there's a very specific set of circumstances which is okay, which currently aren't being.
And not to mention that actually something I reflected on myself. That actually also depends on the station to which one is called.
Sure.
And so in my case, for example, even though I've kind of speculated on that idea, like what if there was like a Christian uprising here, for example, gotta be careful what I say here. Yeah. As much as I would love, shall we say, for our current government to be replaced in a spectacular fashion,
because they are doing mass abortion.
Yeah. They are at minimum legalizing that. They are.
They're committing genocide.
Exactly. Yeah. It's basically the equivalent of when the Mongol government. It's not like they're directly doing it, but it's like when the Mongol government would take over a city and they say to their guys, all right, you're free, go kill and rape whoever you want.
Yeah.
It's not like the government saying, kill that specific guy there. That's not what the government's doing, but they're basically doing the same thing as the Mongol Empire and their genocides, which actually had an
But also abortions in Australia are done by the state healthcare system.
Exactly.
So they are actually.
Exactly. Yeah. So it is government sponsored. So again, as much as I would like my government to be replaced, and obviously I prefer it to be a peaceful transition, but if it was necessary for it to be, shall we say, spectacular, I would be okay with that. Nonetheless, for myself, with the station that I believe I'm called to, that being, God willing, the priesthood, that's just not going to be me. I'm likely not going to be the guy, I'm not going to be the Lisan al-Gaib. That's not my intention.
What should we do with them? Send them to paradise. We're not saying.
No, we're.
All right, we don't have much time.
Yeah.
Do you have a question you want to ask me?
Yeah. So you're a fellow Christian nationalist as well. Do you believe that there is ever a point where a certain group in a Christian nationalist utopic state or whatever, where there's a certain group that at least appears to affirm a general orthodoxy, and so all else being equal, they can claim to be brothers of Christ? Is there ever a situation such that their disruption of the public order could warrant from the state, which is a Christian nationalist state, it could warrant some levels of punishment up to and including death?
So like Baptists.
Sure. If they were causing a big enough ruckus, if you will. Sean, Luke, you better be paying attention.
So first of all, I'm pro-death penalty.
Yep.
And I'm also against Christians killing Christians. Yep. But we also have to admit that if someone could claim to be a Christian and be orthodox in their belief, but then murder someone.
Exactly.
But it's been known to happen.
Exactly.
And I believe that person should be executed. So if there was an orthodox group like maybe Baptists who were creating a public nuisance, what would warrant their execution would only be, I think, if they themselves shed innocent blood.
Right.
Because I believe the death penalty is commanded in Genesis 9, is it?
Yeah.
But I also believe that the death penalty is while it's commanded, it's also restricted. So God says if someone sheds blood, you must shed his blood.
Right.
Now in the Torah, there's other laws as well, but I think in principle, they wouldn't be able to be executed. Imprisoned if they wanted to, if they were causing a major public nuisance and trying basically sowing seeds of rebellion, that sort of thing. Imprisonment, I think, would be absolutely fine. Yeah, okay. Because that's like a secular crime that they're committing, and you need to enforce that.
Yeah. I guess I largely agree with you with that on that. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a shocking thing to think about. Well, in light of that, that was a very long but also fascinating discussion done in this once in a few years opportunity of being two YouTube boys being in the flesh in a place talking together on some really awesome topics. So, Reverend River Devereux, thank you so much for being here and talking with me.
Thank you, Paul. It's been a wonderful couple of days with you. And we should also say we've got something very big in the works.
That we do.
While I'm here.
Yeah.
And
this will probably be uploaded before that's done.
Happens.
So this is relevant.
So just stay tuned. It will be on my channel, but Paul's obviously heavily involved in everything. So we I don't want to say anything just yet, but we've got something big planned. It's going to be a bit more than just a long form discussion.
It's not just going to be something with a webcam and a PowerPoint. It's not even just going to be this, which is already a higher production than usual. It's
big.
It's next level. You guys, trust me, you're going to love it.
So I just keep an ear out for that as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Reverend River Devereux, for joining me.
Thank you, man.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Reverend River Devereux, and this has been the other Paul. Thank you so much for watching through this discussion if you have, and I hope you have a lovely day or evening. God bless.
God bless you all. See ya.